The Adventure of the Second Stain. I had intended The Adventure of the Abbey Grange to be the last of those exploits of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, which I should ever communicate to the public. This resolution of mine was not due to any lack of material, since I have notes of many hundreds of cases to which I have never alluded, nor was it caused by any waning interest of my part of the readers and the singular personality and the unique methods of this remarkable man. The real reason lay in the reluctance which Mr. Holmes has shown to the continued publication of his experiences. So long as he is in actual professional practice, the records of his successes were of some practical value to him. But since he has definitely retired from London and betaken himself to the study of bee farming on the Sussex Downs, notoriety has become hateful to him, and he has preemptively requested that his wishes in the matter should be strictly observed. It was only upon my representing to him that I had given a promise that The Adventure of the Second Stain should be published when that times were ripe, and pointing out to him that it's the only appropriate that his long series of episodes should culminate in the most important and international case which he has ever been called upon to handle, that I at last succeeded in obtaining his consent that the carefully guarded account of the incident should at last be laid before the public. In the telling the story, I seem to be somewhat vague in certain details. The public all readily understand that there is an excellent reason for my reticence. It was, then, in the year 11, even in the decade that shall be nameless, that upon one Tuesday morning in autumn we found two visitors of European fame within the walls of our humble room in Baker Street. The one, austere, high-nosed, eagle-eyed, and dominant, was none other than the illustrious Lord Bellinger, the twice Premier of Britain. The other, dark, clear-cut, and elegant, hardly yet of middle age, and endowed with every beauty of the body and mind, was the Right Honourable Trelawney Hope, Secretary of European Affairs, and the most rising statesman in the country. They sat side by side upon our paper-littered settee, and it was easy to see from their worn and anxious faces that this is business of the most pressing importance which had brought them. The Premier's thin, blue-veined hand was clasped tightly over an ivory head of his umbrella, and his gaunt, ascetic face looked gloomily from Holmes to me. The European Secretary pulled nervously at his moustache and fidgeted with the seals of his waist-chain. When I discovered my loss, Mr. Holmes, it was at 8 o'clock this morning. I was once informed of the Prime Minister, and it was at his suggestion that we both come to see you. Have you informed the police? No, sir, said the Prime Minister, with a quick, decisive manner for which he was famous. We have not done so, nor is it possible that we should do so. To inform the police must, in the long run, mean to inform the public, and this is what we particularly desire to avoid. And why, sir? Because the document in question is of such immense importance that his publication might very easily, I might almost say probably, lead to European complications of the utmost moment. It is not so much to say that the peace or war may hang upon the issue, unless its recovery can be attained with the utmost secrecy, then it may as well not be recovered at all. For all that is aimed by those who have taken it is that the contents should be known generally. I understand. Now, Mr. Trelawney Hope, I should be much obliged if you would tell me exactly the circumstances under which this document disappeared. That can be done in very few words, Mr. Holmes. The letter, for it was a letter from a foreign potentate, was received 6 days ago. It was of such importance that it never left my side, but I have taken it across each evening to my house in Whitehall Terrace, and kept it in my bedroom in a locked dispatch box. It was there last night, of that I am certain. I actually opened the box while I was dressing for dinner, and saw the document inside. This morning it was gone. The dispatch box had stood beside the glass upon my dressing table all night. I am a light sleeper, and so is my wife. We were both prepared to swear that no one could have entered the room during the night, and yet, I repeat, the paper is gone. What time does this happen? 7:30. How long was it before you went to bed? My wife and I had just gone to the theater, and I waited up for her. It was 11:30 before we went to the room. Then 4 hours. The dispatch box laid unguarded. No one was ever permitted into that room save for the housemaid in the morning and my valet or my wife's maid during the rest of the day. They are both trusty servants who have been with us for a long time. Besides, neither of them could possibly have known that there was anything more valuable in that ordinary departmental papers than my dispatch box. Who did know the existence of the letter? No one in the house. Surely your wife knew? No, sir, I said nothing to my wife until I missed the paper in the morning. The Premier nodded approvingly. I have known, sir, how high your sense of public duty, said he, and I am convinced that in this case of the secret this importance would rise superior to most intimate domestic ties. The secretary bowed. You do me no more justice, sir. Until this morning I have never breathed one word to my wife upon this matter. Could she have guessed? No, Mr. Holmes, she could not have guessed, nor could anyone have guessed. Have you lost any documents before? No, sir! Who is there in England who did not know the existence of this letter? Each member of the cabinet was informed of it yesterday, but the pledge of secrecy which attends a cabinet meeting was increased by solemn warning which was given by the Prime Minister. Good heavens, to think that within a few hours I should myself have lost it. His handsome face was distorted with a spasm of despair, and his hands tore through his hair. For a moment we caught a glimpse of the natural man, impulsive, ardent, and keenly sensitive. Then the anarchistic mask was replaced, and the gentle voice had returned. Besides the members of cabinet, there are 2, possibly 3 departmental officials who know of the letter. No one else in England, Mr. Holmes, I assure you. But abroad? I believe that no one abroad has seen it save the man who wrote it. I am well convinced that his ministers, that the usual official channels have not been employed. Holmes considered for some little time. Now, sir, I must ask you for more particularity which this document is, and why its disappearance should have such momentous consequences. The 2 statesmen exchanged a quick glance, and the Premier's shaggy eyebrows furrowed together in a frown. Mr. Holmes, the envelope is a long, thin one of pale blue color. There is a seal of red wax stamped with a crouching lion. It is addressed in large, bold handwriting to I fear less, said Holmes. That interesting and indeed essential are the details are, the more inquiries must go more to the root of things. What was the letter? That is a state secret of the utmost importance, and I fear that I cannot tell you, nor do I see it that it is necessary. If by the aid of the powers which you are said to possess you can find such an envelope, as I describe, and with its enclosure, you will have deserved well for your country, and earned any honor which it lies in our power to bestow. Holmes rose with a smile. You are 2 of the most busy men in the country, said he, and in my own way I have also many good calls upon me. I regret exceedingly that I cannot help you in this matter, and any constitution of this interview will be a waste of my time. The Premier sprang to his feet with that fierce, quick gleam in his deep-set eyes before the cabinet was cowed. I am not accustomed, sir, he began, but mastered his anger and resumed his seat. For a moment or more there was silence. Then the old statesman shrugged his shoulders. We must accept your terms, Mr. Holmes. No doubt you are right, and it is unreasonable for us to expect you to act unless we give you our entire confidence. I agree with you, sir, said the younger statesman. Then I will tell you, relying entirely upon your honor and that of your colleague, Dr. Watson, I may appeal to your patriotism, for not I could imagine a greater misfortune for our country than this affair should come out. You may safely trust us. The letter, then, is from a certain foreign potentate who has been ruffled by some recent colonial developments in this country. It has been written hurriedly and upon his own responsibility entirely. Inquiries have been shown that his ministers know nothing of the matter. At the same time, it is couched in a so unfortunate a manner that certain phrases in it are so provocative a character that its publication would undoubtedly lead to the most dangerous state of feeling in this country. There would be such a ferment, sir, that I do not hesitate to say that within a week of the publication of that letter, this country would be involved in a great war. Holmes wrote a name upon a slip of paper, then handed it to the Premier. Exactly, it was he. And this is the letter. This letter, which may well mean the expenditure of 1,000 millions of the lives of hundreds, thousands of men, which has become lost in this unaccountable fashion. Have you informed the sender? Yes, sir. A cipher telegram has been dispatched. Perhaps he desires a publication of the letter. No, sir. I have strong reason to believe that he already understands that he has acted in an indiscreet and hot-headed manner. It would be a greater blow to him and to his country than to us if this letter were to come out. If this is so, whose interest is in it that the letter should come out? Why should anyone desire to seal it or to publish it? There, Mr. Holmes, you take me into the regions of high international politics. But if you consider the European situation, you will have no difficulty in perceiving the motive. The whole of Europe is an armed camp. There is no double league which makes a fair balance of military power. Great Britain holds the scales. If Britain were driven into war with one confederacy, it would assure the supremacy of the other confederacy, whether they joined in the war or not. Do you follow? Very clearly. Then it is the interest of the enemies of this potentate to secure and publish this letter as to make the breach between his country and ours. Yes, sir. And to whom would this document be sent if it fell into the hands of the enemy? To any of the great chancelleries of Europe. It is probably speeding on its way there in the present instant as fast as the steam can take it. Mr. Trelawney dropped his head to his chest and groaned aloud. The Premier placed his hand kindly upon his shoulder. It is not your misfortune, my poor fellow. No one can blame you. There is no precaution which you have neglected. Now, Mr. Holmes, you are in full possession of the facts. What course do you recommend? Holmes shook his head mournfully. You think, sir, that unless this document is recovered, there will be war? I think it is very probable. Then, sir, prepare for war. That is hard saying, Mr. Holmes. Consider the facts, sir. It is inconceivable that it was taken after 11:30 at night, since I understand that Mr. Hope and his wife were both in the room from that hour until the loss was found out. It was taken then yesterday evening between 7:30 and 11:30, probably near the earlier hour, since whoever took it evidently knew that it was there and would naturally secure it as early as possible. Now, sir, if the document of this importance were taken at that hour, where can it be now? And no one has any reason to retain it. It has been passed readily on to those who need it. What chance have we to overtake or even trace it? It is beyond our reach. The Prime Minister rose from the settee. What you say is perfectly logical, Mr. Holmes. I feel that the matter is indeed out of our hands. Let us presume, for argument's sake, that the document was taken by the maid or by the valet. They are both, for instance, trusted, tried servants.
I understand you say that your room is on the second floor, and that there is no entrance from without, and that from within no one could go up unobserved. It must be, then, that somebody in the house who has taken it, to whom the thief would take it. Known of several international spies and security agents, whose names are tolerably familiar to me. There are three who may be said to be the heads of their profession. It will begin my search by going round and finding if each of them has at his post. If one is missing, especially if he has disappeared since last night, we will have some indication as to where the document has gone.
Why should he be missing? Asked the European secretary. He would take the letter to the embassy in London, as likely as not.
I fancy not. These agents work independently, and the relations with the embassies are often strained.
The Prime Minister nodded with his acquiescence. I believe you're right, Mr. Holmes. He would take so valuable a prize to the headquarters with his own hands. I think that your course of action is an excellent one. Meanwhile, I hope we cannot neglect our other duties on account of this one misfortune. Should there be any fresh developments during the day, we shall communicate with you, and you will no doubt let us know the results of your own inquiries. The two statesmen bowed and walked gravely from the room. When our illustrious visitors had departed, Holmes lit his pipe in silence, and sat for some time lost in the deepest thought. I had opened the morning paper, which had immersed a sensational crime which had occurred in London the night before, when my friend gave an exclamation, sprang to his feet, and laid his pipe upon the mantelpiece. "Yes," said he, "there's no better way to approaching it. The situation is desperate, but not hopeless. Even now, if we could be sure which of them has taken it, it is possible that it has not yet passed out of his hands. After all, it is a question of money with these fellows, and I have the British Treasury behind me. If it's on the marketplace, I'll buy it, if it means another penny of income tax. It is conceivable that the fellow might hold it back to see what bids come from the side before he tries his luck on others. There are only three of those capable of playing so bold a game. They are Obstetine, Latrosse, and Eduardo Lucas. I will see each of them." I glanced at my own paper. "Is that Eduardo Lucas of Godolphin Street?"
"Yes."
"You will not see him."
"Why not?"
"He was murdered in his house last night." My friend was so often astonished me for the course of our adventures that it was with some sense of exultation that I now realized how completely I had astonished him. He stared in amazement, and then snatched the paper from my hands. This was the paragraph which I had just been engaged in reading when he rose from his chair. "Murder in Westminster. A crime of mysterious character was committed last night at 16 Godolphin Street, one of the old-fashioned and secluded rows of 18th-century houses which lie between the river and the Abbey, almost in the shadow of the great tower of the Houses of Parliament. This small but select mansion has been inhabited for some years by Mr. Eduardo Lucas, well known to society circles both on account of his charming personality and because he has a well-deserved reputation of being one of the most amateur tenors in the country. Mr. Lucas is an unmarried 34 years of age, has establishments, consists of Mrs. Pringle, an elderly housekeeper, and of Mitten, his valet. The former retires early and sleeps at the top of the house. The valet was out at evening visiting a friend in Hammersmith. From 10 o'clock onwards, Mr. Lucas had the house to himself. What occurred during that time has not yet transpired, but 11:45, Police Constable Barrett, passing along Godolphin Street, observed the door of 16 was ajar. He knocked, but receiving no answer, perceiving a light in the front room, he advanced into the passage and again knocked, without reply. Then he pushed open the door and entered. The room was in a state of wild disorder, the furniture being all swept to one side, and one chair lying on its back in the center. Besides his chair, and still grasping at one of its legs, lay the unfortunate tenant of the house. He had been stabbed to the heart, and must have died instantly. The knife in which the crime had been committed was a curved Indian dagger, plucked down from the trophy of ornamental arms which adorned one of the walls. The robbery does not appear to have been the motive of the crime, for there had been no attempts to remove the valuable contents of the room. Mr. Eduardo Lucas was well known and popular for his violent and mysterious fate, will arouse a painful interest and intense sympathy in a widespread circle of friends.
Well, Watson, what do you make of this?
Asked Holmes after a long pause. It is an amazing coincidence.
A coincidence? Here is one of the three men whom had named possible actions of the drama, and he meets a violent death within the very hours in which the drama has been enacted. The odds are enormous against this being coincidence. No figures could express them. No, my dear Watson, the two events are connected, must be connected. It is for us to find the connection.
But now the official police must know all.
Not at all. They know all they see at Godolphin Street. They know, or shall know, nothing of Whitehall Terrace. Only we know of both events, and we can trace the relation between them. There is one obvious point which would, in any case, have turned my suspicion to Lucas. Godolphin Street, Westminster, is only a few minutes from the Whitehall Terrace. The other secret agents whom I have named live in the extreme West End. It was easier, therefore, for Lucas than the others to establish a connection to receive the message of the European Secretary's household. A small thing, and yet, where events were compressed into a few hours, it may prove essential. Hello, what have we here?
Mrs. Hudson appeared with a lady's card upon her salver. Holmes glanced at it and raised his eyebrows and handed it over to me.
Ask Lady Hilda Trelawney Hope if she will be so kind to step up, said he.
A moment later, our modest apartment, already so distinguished in the morning, was further honored by the entrance of the most lovely lit woman in London. I had often heard of the beauty of the youngest daughter of the late Duke of Belminster, but no description of it, and no contemplation of colourless photographs had prepared me for the subtle, delicate charm and the beautiful colouring of exquisite head. And yet, as we saw it that autumn morning, it was not its beauty which would be the first thing to impress the observer. The cheek was lovely, but it was paled with emotion. The eyes were bright, but it was brightless of fever. The sensitive mouth was as tight and drawn as efforts at self-command. Terror, not beauty, was the first sprang to the eye of a fair visitor stood framed for an instant in the open door.
Has my husband been here, Mr. Holmes?
Yes, madam. He was here before.
Mr. Holmes, I implore you not to tell him that I came here.
Holmes's bowed coldly and motioned the lady to the chair.
Your ladyship places me in a very delicate position. I beg that you sit down and tell me what you desire, but I fear that I cannot make any unconditional promise.
She swept across the room and seated herself with her back to the window. It was a queenly presence, tall, graceful, intensely womanly.
Mr. Holmes,
said she, with her white-gloved hands clasped and unclasped as she spoke.
I will speak frankly to you in the hope that it may induce you to speak frankly in return. I hear the complete confidence between my husband and me on all matters save one. The one is politics. On this his lips are sealed. He tells me nothing. Now, I am aware that there is a most deplorable occurrence in our house last night. I know that a paper has disappeared, but because the matter is political, my husband refuses to take me into his complete confidence. Now it is essential, I say, that I should thoroughly understand it. You are the only other person, save these politicians, who know the true facts. I beg you, then, Mr. Holmes, to tell me exactly what has happened and what it will lead to. Tell me, Mr. Holmes. Let no regard for your client's interests keep you silent, for I assure you that in his interests, if you would only see it, would be best served by taking me into his complete confidence. What was this paper that was stolen?
Madam, what you ask me is really impossible. She groaned and sank her face into her hands.
You must see it that it is so, madam. If your husband thinks fit to keep you in the dark of this matter, it is for me, who have only learned the true facts under the pledge of professional secrecy, to tell that he has withheld. It is not fair to ask it. It is him whom you must ask. I have asked him. I come to you as the last resource. But without your telling me anything definite, Mr. Holmes, you may do me a great service if you would enlighten me on one point.
What is it, madam?
Is my husband's political career likely to suffer through this incident?
Well, madam, unless it is set right, it may certainly have a very unfortunate effect. She drew in her breath sharply, as one whose doubts were resolved.
One more question, Mr. Holmes. From an expression which my husband dropped in the first shock of the disaster, I understood that terrible public consequences may arise from the loss of this document.
If he said so, I certainly cannot deny it.
Of what nature are they?
Nay, madam, there again you ask me more than I can possibly answer.
Then I will take up no more of your time. I cannot blame you, Mr. Holmes, for having refused to speak more freely, and you on your side will not, I am sure, think the worse of me because I desire, even against his own will, to share my husband's anxieties. Once more I beg that you will say nothing of my visit.
She looked back at us from the door, and I had the last impression that the beautiful haunted face, the startled eyes, and the drawn mouth. And then she was gone. Now, Watson, the fair sex is your department, said Holmes with a smile when the dwindling frou-frou of skirts had ended in the slam of the front door. What was the fair lady's game? What does she really want? Surely your own statement is clear and her anxiety very natural. Think of her appearance, Watson, her manner, her suppressed excitement, her restlessness, her tenacity in asking the same questions. Remember that she comes from a caste who do not lightly show emotion. She was certainly much moved. Remember also the curious earnestness with which she assured that it was best for her husband that she should not, so that she should know all. What did she mean by that? And you must have observed, Watson, how she maneuvered to have the light at her back. She did not wish us to read her expression. Yes, she chose the one chair in the room. And yet her motives of women are so inscrutable. You remember the woman in Margate, whom I suspected for the same reason? No powder on her nose. She proved that to be the correct solution. How can you build on such quicksand? The most trivial action mean volumes, and the most extraordinary conduct may depend upon a hairpin or curling tongs. Good morning, Watson. Are you off? Yes, I will while away the morning at Godolphin Street with our friends in the regular establishment. With our Otto Lucas lies in the solution of our problem, though I must admit I have not taken an inkling as to what form it may take. It is a capital mistake to theorize in advance of the facts. Do stay on guard, my good Watson, and receive any fresh visitors. I'll join you at lunch if I am able. All that day and the next, Holmes was in a mood which his friends would call taciturn and others morose. He ran in and ran out, smoked incessantly, played snatches on his violin, sank into reveries, devoured sandwiches at irregular hours, and hardly answered the casual question which I put to him. It was evident to me that the things were not going well with him or his quest. He would say nothing of the case, and it was from the papers that I learned the particulars of the inquest, and the rest of the subsequent release of John Mitten, the valet from the deceased. The coroner's jury brought in the obvious, willful murder, but the parties remained as unknown as ever. No motive was suggested. The room was full of articles of value, and none had been taken. The dead man's papers had not been tampered with. They were carefully examined and shown that he had a keen student of international policies and an infatigable gossip, a remarkable linguist,
and an untiring letter writer. He had been on intimate terms with the leading politicians for several countries, but nothing sensational was discovered among the documents which filled his drawers. As for the relationship with women, they appeared to have been promiscuous but superficial. He had many acquaintances, among them but few friends, and no one whom he loved. His habits were regular, his conduct inoffensive. His death was an absolute mystery, and likely to remain so. As to the arrest of James Mitten, the valet, it was the counsel of despair as an alternative and absolute inaction. But no case could be sustained against him. He had visited his friends in Hammersmith that night. The alibi was complete. It was true that he started home at an hour which should have brought him at Westminster before the time when the crime was discovered, but his own explanation that he had walked part of the way seemed probable enough in the view of the imminence of the night. He had actually arrived at 12 o'clock, and appeared to be overwhelmed by the unexpected tragedy. He had always been on good terms with his master. Several of the dead man's possession, notably a small case of razors, had been found in the valet's boxes, but he explained that they had been presents from the deceased. And the housekeeper was able to corroborate the story. Mitten had been in Lucas's employment for 3 years. It was noticeable that Lucas did not take Mitten on the continent with him. Sometimes he visited Paris for 3 months on end, but Mitten was left in charge of the Godolphin Street house. As for the housekeeper, she had heard nothing on the night of the crime. If her master had a visitor, he had himself admitted him. So for 3 mornings the mystery remained, so far as I could follow in the papers. If Holmes knew, he kept more to his counsel. But as he told me, the Inspector Lestrade had taken him into the confidence of the case. I knew that he was in close touch with early development. Upon the 4th day there appeared a long telegram in the Paris, which seemed to solve the whole question. A discovery has been made by the Parisian police, said the Daily Telegraph, which raises the veil which hung around the tragic fate of Mr. Eduardo Lucas, who met his death by violence Monday night at Godolphin Street, Westminster. Our readers will remember that the deceased gentleman was found stabbed in his room, and that some suspicion attached to his valet, but that case broke down as an alibi. Yesterday, a lady who had been known as Mime, Minister Faure, occupied a small villa in Rue Austerès, was reported to the authorities by her servants as being insane. An examination showed that she had indeed developed a mania of a dangerous and permanent form. On the inquiry, the police had discovered that Madame Henri Fournier only returned from a journey to London on Tuesday night, and there was evidence to connect her with the crime at Westminster. A comparison of photographs had proved conclusively that Madame Henri Fournier and Eduardo Lucas were really one and the same person, and they had deceased to have some reason lived a double life in London and Paris. Madame Forte, who was a Creole of origin, is of only extremely excitable nature and is justified in the past from attacks of jealousy and amounted to frenzy. It is conjectured that it is one of these she committed the terrible crime which caused such a sensation in London. Her movements upon the Monday night might have been traced if undoubtedly the woman answering her description attracted such attention at Charing Cross Station on Tuesday morning by a witness as the appearance and violence of her gestures. It is probable, therefore, that the crime was either committed when insane, or that its immediate effect was to drive the unhappy woman out of her mind. At present she is unable to give any coherent account of the past, and the doctors hold out no hopes at the re-establishment of her reason. There is evidence that a woman who might have been Madame Fournier was seen at some hours on Monday night watching a house in Godolphin Street. What do you think of that, Holmes? I read the account aloud to him while he finished his breakfast. My dear Watson, said he as he rose from the table and paced about up and down the room, you are most long-suffering, but if I have told you nothing in the past 3 days, it is because there is nothing to tell. Even now, this report from Paris does not help us much. Surely it is the final in regards to the man's death. The man's death is a mere incident. The trivial episode, in comparison with our real task, which is to trace the document and save the European catastrophe. Only one important thing has happened in the last few days, and that is nothing has happened. I get reports almost hourly from the government, and it is certain that nowhere in Europe is there any sign of trouble. Now, if this letter were loose, no, it can't be loose. But if it isn't loose, where can it be? Who has it? Why is it held back? That's the question that beats my brain like a hammer. It was indeed a coincidence that Lucas should meet his death on the night that the letter disappeared. Did the letter ever reach him? If so, why is it not among his papers? Did this mad wife of his carry it off with her? If so, is it in her house in Paris? How could I search for it without the French police suspecting having their suspicion raised? It is a case, my dear Watson, where the law is as dangerous as the criminals are. Every man's hand is against us, and yet the interests at stake are colossal. Should I bring it to a successful conclusion, it will certainly represent the crowning glory of my career. And here it is, my latest from the front.
Holmes glanced hurriedly at the note which had been handed in.
Hello, Lestrade seems to have observed something of interest. Put on your hat, Watson, and we will stroll down together to Westminster.
It was my first visit to the scene of the crime, a high, dingy, narrow-chested house. Prim, formal, and solid, like a century which gave it birth. Lestrade's bulldog features gazed out at us from the front window, and he greeted us warmly when the big constable had opened the door to let us in. The room in which we were drawn was that in which the crime had been committed, but no trace of it now remained, save for an ugly, irregular stain upon the carpet. This carpet was a small, square drugget of the center of the room, surrounded by a broad expanse of beautiful, old-fashioned wood flooring and square blocks highly polished. Over the fireplace was a magnificent trophy of weapons, one of which had been used that tragic night. And the window was a sumptuous writing desk, and every detail of the apartment, the pictures, the rugs, and the hangings, all pointed to a taste which was luxurious to the verge of effeminacy. "Seen the Paris news?" asked Lestrade. Holmes nodded. Our French friend seemed to have touched the spot this time. No doubt it's just as I say. She knocked at the door, surprise visits, I guess, for he kept the life of tight water compartments. He let her in, couldn't keep her in the street. She told him how she had traced him, reproached him. One thing led to another, and then that dagger was so handy at the end soon came. It wasn't all done in an instant, though, for these chairs were all swept over yonder, and he had one in his hand as if he had tried to hold her off with it. We've got it all as clear as if we had been seeing it. Holmes raised his eyebrows. And yet, you have sent for me. Ah, yes, that's another matter, a mere trifle, but the sort of thing you take an interest in. Queer, you know, and what you might call freakish. It has nothing to do with the main fact. Can't have, on the face of it. What is it, then? Well, you know, after a crime of this sort, it's very careful to keep things in their position. Nothing has been moved. Officer in charge here night and day this morning as the man was buried and the investigation over. So far as the room is concerned, we thought we could tidy up a bit. This carpet, you see. It is not the fashion down. It is only just laid there. We had a station to raise it, and we found... Yes, you found? Holmes's face grew tense with anxiety. Well, I'm sure you would have never guessed in 100 years what we found. And, you see the stain on the carpet? Well, a great deal must have soaked through, must it not? Undoubtedly it must. Well, you'll be surprised to hear that there's no stain on the white woodwork underneath to correspond. No stain? There must be. Yes, you would say that, but the fact remains that there isn't. He took a corner of the carpet in his hand, and turning it over, he showed that it was indeed as he said. But the underside is stained as the upper. It must have left a mark. Lestrade chuckled with delight at having puzzled the famous expert. Now I'll show you the explanation. There is a second stain, but it does not correspond with the other. See for yourself. As he spoke, he turned over another portion of the carpet, and there, sure enough, was a great crimson spill upon the square white facing of the old-fashioned floor.
What do you make of it, Mr. Holmes? Why, it is simple enough. 2 stains did correspond, but the carpet has been turned around, as if the square had been unfastened, as it is easily done. The official of police don't need you, Mr. Holmes, to tell you that the carpet must have been turned around. That's clear enough, for the stains lie above each other, if you lay it this other way. But what I say is, I want to know who shifted it and why.
I could see from Holmes's rigid face that he was vibrating with inward excitement.
Look here, Lestrade, he said. Has the constable in the passage been in charge over the place the whole time?
Yes, he has.
Well, take my advice. Examine him carefully. Don't do it before us. We'll wait here. You take him to the back of the room. You'll be more likely to get confession out of him alone. Ask him how he dared to admit people and leave him alone in this room. Don't ask him if he has done it. Take it for granted. Tell him you know someone has been here. Press him. Tell him that the full confession is his only chance for forgiveness. Do exactly what I told you. By George, if he knows, I'll have it out with him,
cried Lestrade. He darted out into the hall, and for a few moments later his bullying voice sounded in the back room.
Now, Watson, now,
cried Holmes with a fevered eagerness. All the demoniacal force of the man masked behind the listless manner burst out into a paroxysm of energy. He tore the drugget from the floor. In an instant he was down on his hands and knees, clawing at each of the squares of wood beneath it. One turned sideways as he dug his nails into the edge of it. It hinged back like a lid of a box. A small black cavity opened beneath it. Holmes plunged his eager hand into it, and with it he drew back a snarl of anger and disappointment. It was empty.
Quick, Watson, quick! Get it back again.
The wooden lid was replaced, and the Duchess had only just been drawn straight when Lestrade wrote. His voice was heard in the passage. He found Holmes leaning languidly against the mantelpiece, resigned and patient, endeavoring to conceal his irrepressible yawn.
Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Holmes. I can see that you're bored to death with the whole affair. Well, he's confessed, all right. Come in here, Miss Pearson. Let these gentlemen hear your most inscrutable conduct.
The big constable, hot and penitent, sidled into the room.
I meant no harm, sir, I'm sure. The young woman came to the door last evening, mistook the house, she did, and then we got talking. It's lonesome, and when you're on duty all day... Well, what happened? She wanted to see the scene where the crime was done. Had read about it in the papers and said she was very respectable and well-spoken young woman, sir, and I saw no harm in letting her have a peep. When she saw the mark on the carpet, she was dropped on the floor and lay as if she was dead. I ran to the back and got some water, but I could not bring it to her. And then I went around to the corner of the ivy plant for some brandy, and by the time I had brought back, the young woman had recovered and was off, ashamed of herself, I dare say, and dared not to face me.
How about moving the drugget?
Oh, sir, it was rumpled a bit, certainly, when I was back. You see, she fell on it, and it lies in the polished floor, so nothing to keep it in place. I straightened it out for afterwards. It's a lesson that you should do yourself. You can't deceive me, Constable Macpherson, said Lestrade with dignity. No doubt you thought you could breach your duty and never discover that the mere glance at the drugget was enough to evidence that someone had been admitted into the room. It's lucky for you, young man, that nothing is missing, or you would find yourself in Queer Street. I'm going to have you called down for over such petty business, Mr. Holmes, but I thought the point of the second stain not corresponding with the first would interest you. Certainly it was most interesting. Has this woman only been here once, Constable? Yes, sir, only once. Who was she? Didn't know the name, sir. Was answering an advertisement about typewriting and came in the wrong number. Very pleasant, genteel young woman. Tall? Handsome? Yes, sir, she was a well-grown young woman. I suppose you might say she was handsome. Perhaps some would say she was very handsome. Oh, officer, do let me have a peep, says she. She had a pretty coaxing way, as you might say, and I thought there was no harm in letting her just put her head in through the door. How was she dressed? Quite so, a long mantle down to her feet. What time was it? It was growing dusk at the time. They were lighting the lamps as I came back with the brandy. Very good, said Holmes. Come, Watson. I think that we have more important work elsewhere.
As we left the house, Lestrade remained in the front room while the repentant constable opened the door to let us out. Holmes turned on the step and held up something in his hand. The constable glared intently. Good Lord, sir, he said with amazement on his face. Holmes put a finger on his lips, replaced his hand to his breast pocket, and burst out laughing as we turned down the street. Excellent, he said. Come, friend Watson. The curtain rings up more than the last act. You will be relieved to hear that there will be no war, and the Right Honourable Trelawney Hope will suffer no setback in his brilliant career. That it was indiscreet sovereign who will receive no punishment for his indiscretion. That the Prime Minister will have no European complications to deal with, and that with a little tact and management upon our part, nobody will be a penny for the worse for what might have been a very ugly incident. My mind filled with admiration for this extraordinary man. You've solved it, I cried. Hardly that, Watson. There are some points at which are dark as ever, but we have so much that it will be in our favour that if we cannot get rest, we will go straight to Whitehall Terrace and bring the matter to a head. When we arrived at the residence of the European Secretary, it was Lady Hilda Trelawney Hope that Sherlock Holmes inquired. We were shown into the morning room. Mr. Holmes, said the lady, and her face was pink with indignation. This is surely most unfair and ungenerous upon your part. I desired, as I have explained, to keep my visit with you a secret, lest my husband should think I was intruding into his affairs. And yet you compromised me by coming here and showing that you have the business relations between us. Unfortunately, madam, I have no positive alternative. I have been commissioned to recover this immensely important paper. I must therefore ask you, madam, to be kind enough to place it in my hands. The young lady sprang to her feet, with the color all dashed in an instant from her beautiful face. Her eyes glazed, she tottered, and I thought that she would faint. Then, with a grand effort, she rallied from the shock, and the supreme astonishment and indignation chased every other expression from her face. You insult me, Mr. Holmes. Come, madam, it is useless. Give up the letter. She darted for the bell. The butler shall show you out. Do not linger, Lady Hilda. If you do, then all my earnest efforts to avoid a scandal will be frustrated. Give up the letter, and all will be set right. If you will work with me, I can arrange everything. If you work against me, I must expose you. She stood grandly defiant, a queenly figure, her eyes fixed upon us as if he could read his very soul. Her hand was on the bell, but she had forborne to ring it. You are trying to frighten me. It is not a very manly thing, Mr. Holmes, to come here and browbeat a woman. You say that you know something. What is it that you know? Pray, sit down, madam. You will hurt yourself if you fall. I will not speak until you sit down. Thank you. I give you 5 minutes, Mr. Holmes. One is enough, Lady Hilda. I know of your visit to Eduardo Lucas, of your giving him this document, and of your ingenious return to the room last night, in which maneuver you took the letter from the hiding place under the carpet. She stared at him with an ashen face and gulped twice before she could speak. You are mad, Mr. Holmes, you are mad, she cried at last. He drew a small piece of cardboard from his pocket. It was the face of a woman cut out of a portrait.
I have carried this because I thought you might find it useful. He said, "The policeman has recognized it."
She gave a gasp and her head dropped back in her chair.
"Come, Lady Hilda, you have the letter. The matter may still be adjusted. I have no desire to bring you to trouble. My duty ends when I have returned the lost letter to your husband. Take my advice and be frank with me. It is your only chance."
Her courage was admirable. Even now she could not own defeat.
"I tell you again, Mr. Holmes, that you are under some absurd illusion." "I am sorry for you, Lady Hilda. I have done my best for you. I can see now that all was in vain."
He rang the bell. The butler entered.
"Is Mr. Trelawney Hope at home?"
"He will be home, sir, at 1:15. Holmes glanced at his watch.
"Still a quarter of an hour," he said. "Very good, I shall wait."
The butler had hardly closed the door behind him when Lady Hilda was down on her knees at Holmes's feet, her hands outstretched, her beautiful face upturned and wet with her tears.
"Oh, spare me, Mr. Holmes, spare me,"
she pleaded in a frenzy of supplication.
"For heaven's sake, don't tell him. I love him so I would not bring one shattered into his life, and I know this would break his noble heart."
Holmes raised the lady.
"I am thankful, madam, that you have come to your senses, even at this last moment. There is not an instant to lose. Where is the letter?"
She darted across to the writing desk, unlocked it, and drew out the long blue envelope.
"Here it is, Mr. Holmes. Would to heaven that I would never seen it." "How can we return it?" Holmes muttered. Quick, we must think of some way. Is there a dispatch box?" "Still in his bedroom." "What a stroke of luck. Quick, madam, bring it in here."
A moment later she had reappeared with the flat box in her hands.
"How did you open it? You have a duplicate key." "Yes, of course you have. Open it."
From out of her bosom Lady Hilda drew a small key. The box flew open. It was stuffed with papers. Holmes thrust the blue envelope deep down in the heart of them, between the leaves of some other document. The box was shut, locked, and returned to the bedroom.
"Now we are ready for him," said Holmes. "We still have 10 minutes. I'm going far to screen you, Lady Hilda. In return, you will spend the time telling me frankly the real meaning of this extraordinary affair." "Mr. Holmes, I will tell you everything,"
cried the lady.
"Oh, Mr. Holmes, I would cut my right hand off before I gave him some moment of sorrow. There's no woman in London who loves her husband as I do, and yet if he knew what I have acted, how I have been compelled to act, he would never forgive me, for his own honor stands so high that he would not forget to pardon the lapse of another. Help me, Mr. Holmes. My happiness, my very lives are at stake."
"Quick, madam. The time grows short."
"It was a letter of mine, Mr. Holmes, an indiscreet letter written before my marriage. A foolish letter, a letter of an impulsive young girl. I meant no harm, and yet he would have thought it criminal. Had he read that letter, his confidence would have been forever destroyed. It is years since I wrote it. I thought that the whole matter was forgotten. And then I was last heard from this man, Lucas, that it had passed into his hands, and that he would lay it before the husband. I implored his mercy. It said that he would return the letter, which it would bring him a certain document which is described in my husband's dispatch box. He had some spy in the office that had told him of his existence. It showed me that no harm would come to my husband. Put yourself in my position, Mr. Holmes. What was I to do?"
"Take your husband into your confidence."
"I could not, Mr. Holmes, I could not. On one side seemed certain ruin, on the other terrible as it seemed to take my husband's paper. Still, in a matter of politics, I could not understand the consequences, while in the matter of love and trust they were only too clear to me. I did it, Mr. Holmes. I took an impression of his key. This man Lucas furnished the duplicate. I opened his dispatch box, took the paper, and conveyed it to Godolphin Street."
"What happened there, madam?"
"I tapped on the door as agreed. Lucas opened it, and I followed him into the house, leaving the hall behind and the door behind me, for I feared to be alone with the man. I remember that there was a woman outside as I entered. When business was soon done, I had my letter on the desk. I handed him the document. He gave me the letter. At this instant there was a sound at the door. There were a few steps in the passage. Lucas quickly turned back to the document into some hiding place there, and I covered it over. What happened after this was the same as a fearful dream. I've sworn a woman of the dark, frantic voice, a woman's voice, which screamed in French, "My waiting is not in vain, unless I have found you with the her." There was a savage struggle. I saw him with a chair in his hand. The knife gleamed in hers. I rushed from the horrid scene and ran to the house. The next morning, the papers, did I learn of the dreadful result. That night I was happy, for I had my letter. I had not seen yet what the future was bring. It was next morning when I realized that I had only exchanged one trouble for another. My husband's anguish at the loss of his paper went to my heart. I could hardly prevent myself from kneeling down at his feet and telling him that what I had done. But that again would mean a confession of my past. I came to you this morning in order to understand the full enormity of my offense. From the instant that I grasped it, my whole mind was turned to the one thought of getting the papers back. It must still be there where Lucas had placed it, for it concealed before his dreadful woman entered the room. If it had not been for her coming, I should have not known where the place of his hiding place was. How was I to get into the playroom? For a moment, days, I watched the place, but the door was never open. Last night I made the attempt. What I did and how I succeeded you have already learned. I brought the paper back with me and thought of destroying it, since I would see no way of returning it without confessing my guilt to my husband. Heavens, I hear a step on the stair.
The European secretary burst excitedly into the room. "What news, Mr. Holmes? Any news?" he cried.
I have some hopes. Ah, thank heaven. His face became radiant. The Prime Minister is lunching with me. May we share your hopes? He has nerves of steel, and yet I hope that he has hardly slept since the terrible event. Jacobs, will you ask the Prime Minister to come up? As for you, dear, I fear that this is a matter of politics. Will you join me in a few minutes in the dining room?
The Prime Minister was subdued, and I could see from the gleam in his eyes and the twitching of his bony hands that he shared the excitement of his young colleague. "I understand you have something to report, Mr. Holmes?"
"Purely negative as yet. My friend answered. I've inquired at every point where it might be, and I am sure that there is no danger to be apprehended."
"But that is not enough, Mr. Holmes. We cannot live on ever for such a volcano. We must have something definite."
"I am in hopes of getting it. That is why I am here. I think the more I think of it, the matter is more convinced that I am sure that the letter has never left this house."
"Mr. Holmes!"
"If it had, it would certainly have been public by now."
"But why would anyone take it in order to keep it in this house?"
"I am not convinced that anyone did take it." "Then how would it leave the dispatch box?" "I am convinced that it never did leave the dispatch box."
"Mr. Holmes, this joking is very ill-timed. We have my assurance that it left the box."
"Have you examined the box since Tuesday morning?"
"No, it was not necessary."
"You have conceivably overlooked it."
"Impossible, I say."
"But I am convinced that I have known such things to happen. I presume there are other papers there. Well, it might have gotten mixed in with them."
"It was on top of my box."
"Someone may have shaken the box and displaced it."
No, I had that everything out."
"Surely it is easily decided."
"Hope," said the Prime Minister. "Let us have the dispatch box brought in." The secretary rang the bell. "Jacobs, bring down my dispatch box. This is a farcical waste of time, but still, if anything else will satisfy you, we'll be done."
"Thank you, Jacobs. Put it here. I always have the key in my watch chain. Here are the papers, you see. A letter from Lord Morrow, report from Sir Charles Hardy. Memorandum from Belgrade, a note on the Russo-German grain taxes, a letter from Madrid, note from Lord Flowers. Good heavens! What is this? Lord Bellinger! Lord Bellinger!
The Prime Minister snatched the blue envelope from his hand.
Yes, this is it. This is the letter intact. Hope I congratulate you. Thank you, thank you. What a weight from my heart. This is inconceivable, Mr. Holmes. You are a wizard, a sorcerer. How did you know it was in there? Because I knew it was nowhere else. I can't believe my eyes.
He wildly ran to the door.
Where is my wife? I must tell her that all is well. Hilda! Hilda!
We heard his voice on the stairs.
The Premier looked at Holmes with twinkling eyes. Come, sir, said he. There is more in this than meets the eye. How came the letter back into the box? Holmes turned away, smiling from his keen scrutiny of those wonderful eyes. We also have our diplomatic secrets, said he, and picking up his hat, he turned to the door.